Hey, what's going on everyone? My name's Alex, and today we're going to be going through how to calibrate all your sensors. So just first up, I'm going to explain to you what's on the table so you know all the materials you need in order to get calibrating. So right over here we've got our different calibration solutions. We've got our 2 EC calibration solutions, we've got our 2 pH solutions, and then we've got our ORP solution. There's also a DO probe which we're going to be calibrating, but that does not require a solution. Over here we've got 2 different bottles. These are what we're going to put the calibration solution in, and that way we can calibrate our probes without using too much of the solution. We've got a little bit of water right over here so we can rinse out our probes between each individual calibration. Also, I've got a little cloth right here if I need to dry off the probes and clean them up. So let's get started. Okay, so before we begin, it's important to turn off your system because we're going to have to take the sensors out of the manifold, and if we don't turn off the pump, water is going to come flying right out. So I'm going to unplug my pump right from the wall, and then I'm going to turn these 2 blue ball valves so this section is isolated. So first off, we're going to be calibrating our EC probe. And so to do that, we're going to need our EC calibration solutions. We've got our low solution and we got our high solution. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take these 2 solutions and I'm going to pour them into these 2 cups right here. Now they're both clear, so make sure that you know which one's which, because if you don't, it's totally not going to work. So the next step is we're going to take the probe out of the manifold. To do that, we're just going to simply turn this top cap a few turns, and that's going to loosen it up so then we can get the probe out. It might be a little bit tricky to get out there. You can give it a little bit of a wiggle, a little bit of a twist, but it's going to come out if you give it enough force, just like that. Okay, so now we got the probe out. The next step is we're going to actually go into the menu and go to the calibration section. So we're going to hit the menu button right there. Then we're going to click on Sensors and then Calibrate, and then we're going to Calibrate EC. So it actually provides you with some instructions on screen, but I'm going to explain those to you in this video. Now the first step is we're actually going to want to clean this probe as much as possible because we're going to be doing a dry calibration, which means we're calibrating it in the air. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my cloth and wipe this down. Now this is actually super important. There's a hole at the tip that can get water or air stuck in it. So I'm actually going to give it a little blow. Make sure that there's nothing in there. If you want to be super careful, what you can sometimes do is you can take your cloth, twist it up at the end like this, and you can thread it through the hole. All right. So now we've got it as clean as possible, and we're going to perform the air calibration. So that only takes a couple of seconds. Now that we've done that, the next step is we're going to be calibrating in the low solution. So I'm going to take my low solution, which is EC 445 millisiemens. Now, if you're using a different unit, that's okay. You just have to convert to whatever unit you're using. But we'll explain to you which those different conversions are in a moment. Okay. So now I'm actually placing the probe into the bottle, and I'm going to shake it around because remember, water can get stuck in there, but so can air. So you want to make sure that it gets all the air out and that it's really in the solution. Now what I like to do if I have the manifold is I actually like to rest the bottle kind of like this. That way it's just a little bit easier, so you don't always have to be holding the calibration bottle. So I've kind of jammed it right in there. And now I'm going to push next to perform the calibration. So once that's done, this next menu is going to show up and it's going to tell us to clean off the probe and put it into the high calibration solution. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the probe out of this solution, and I'm not going to throw this away just yet because I like to use it at the end to confirm my calibration. So I'm going to set it off to the side, and again I'm going to wipe down my probe with a cloth. I'm going to blow to get everything out, wipe it down again so it's nice and dry. And then I'm going to take my high calibration solution, like so, and I'm going to put the probe in. Once again, shake it around, get all the air out of the probe tip, and I'm going to find a nice little home for this thing. And then I'm going to click Next. So once that's done, you're going to see this confirmation screen said the EC probe has been calibrated. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the home screen and we're going to see if the reading is in fact what it should be. So we're going to click done. Then we're going to click our little home button. And in a few seconds, you'll see that the EC is going to read a certain number. And right there it says 1420. Now our solution says 1417. So if you're getting a number between, say, 1410 and 1420, maybe even 1430, that's perfectly fine. So we know that this has been good, but I also want to test the other calibration solution. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this out. I'm going to shake it off, going to wipe it down, going to blow. Wipe it down again, and I might even want to really get in there, so I'm gonna put this little rag in there. Okay, I'm gonna string the cloth through and really get it all nice and clean. All right, so now that it's clean, we're gonna put it into the low solution, so I'm gonna put it in here. So actually this is also a good test. See that it's 0 when it's in the air. That's also a good thing to notice. And now I'm going to put it into here, shake it around. Okay, cool. So we're hitting 440. Now this is a 445, and so if you're seeing somewhere between 440 and 450, you're right on the money. So we've seen that it's good in all these different numbers, so we're very happy with our EC calibration, and we can move on to the next step. So now I'm going to really wipe these things down, down the outside, wipe down the inside. We want them to really be clean, basically just like new, because we don't want the solutions to be contaminated at all. So I'm going to clean this one out. And we're done. So now that we've calibrated the EC probe, the next step is to calibrate the pH probe. One thing I want to note is I actually left the the EC probe out of the holder because we're actually going to need that probe as part of the pH calibration. The reason is because the EC probe is not only for EC, it also has temperature built into it. And so when you're calibrating the probe, the calibration value changes based on the temperature, but by using a temperature probe, it can compensate for that temperature, so it's always going to be 100% accurate. Similar to the EC probe, I'm going to take the pH probe out by twisting this top nut right here, and then I'm going to twist the probe. So you're just going to give it a little twist and pulling motion at the same time, and then sometimes it's a little tricky at the end, but keep at it, and once you get it out there, you're good to go. Now we got both of the probes out, we're going to fill up our bottles with calibration solution. We're going to take these two solutions right here. So we've got the high pH, pH 7 solution. I'm going to pour that right in the bottle. And fortunately, these are actually different colored, so it's hard to mix them up. But the 7 is yellow, and then the low pH 4 solution is pink. So now, once again, we're going to go into our menu. Go to the menu right here, go to sensors. Now, one thing I wanted to point out is right at the bottom of the screen where it says sensors, it actually tells you which probe is which, so you can identify based on the color and position which probe you're calibrating. So if you need to calibrate pH, you see, okay, pH is the second probe right here, and it's a black circle. So now I'm going to click on Calibrate. I'm going to go to Calibrate pH. And then once again, I'm going to have to clean off my probes. So I'm going to take my cup of water, and I'm going to rinse off the pH probe like this. And I'll rinse off the EC probe as well. Now I'm going to take them out. Now the difference between the pH probe and the EC probe are the pH is actually very delicate, and there's a glass ball at the end, which you're really not supposed to touch. So what I like to do is, you just kind of clean this off. You can shake it off a little bit. And if you have to, sometimes you can kind of get the paper towel in there a little bit, just go around the edge, but try your best not to touch the glass ball, because that's going to reduce the life of your pH probe. Similarly, you just want to clean off the EC probe. You can just wipe it down like so. Got this hole at the end, you can blow out of there. You can also use a little paper towel or cloth and get a nice little point right here. So then you can stick it through the hole and clean it out. Okay, so now we've got these cleaned and ready to go. We're going to take our high calibration solution, which is pH 7, put the EC temperature probe in there, put the pH probe in there. They fit nicely like this, and then we're going to push next. So I'm going to, once again, kind of set this thing up just like so, and wait until this is done. Once that's done, we're going to rinse out, we're going to take the probes out of this container, shake them out a little bit, set the container down. Then I'm going to grab my bottle of water, I'm going to mix them around like this, and then I'm going to set that down. And once again, I'm going to clean off my probe. So I'm going to wipe this down with a pH just on the outside, kind of like tap it a little bit, and maybe I'll get a little bit around the ring, but you know, this is pretty good. Wouldn't really have to worry too much about this. Same thing with EC. Gonna get my nice twisted cloth and thread it through the hole, and then we're good to go on to the next step. Okay, so now we're going to take our EC and pH probe and we're going to place them in the calibration solution, agitate the probe a little bit, make sure there's no bubbles, and then we're going to hit next. So now we're done. We can hit the done button, and then we can go back to our menu to confirm that what we've done is correct. So I'm going to click on the home button, and right there we see that our pH is 4.0 and our EC is really high because that's in the pH solution. So actually one thing to note is if it's in logging mode, then all this data is going to show up on your cloud platform. And so if you didn't want to see these really high data spikes, you're actually better off keeping this into inactive mode so that doesn't get logged. All right, so now that we've seen the 4, it's really important for us to check that the 7 is good as well. So once again, I'm going to take this out, shake it off a little bit. Going to clean these probes. It's especially important with the pink solution. So I'm going to clean that off. For the EC probe, I'm going to thread it. Now it's nice and dry, and then for the pH I'm going to wipe it down a little bit more, get a little around the edge, do the best I can without touching the glass ball. And now we're going to put it into the pH 7 solution. So grabbing both of them again, stick them in the solution, agitate them a bit, and then we're going to wait for our monitor to update. So as it gets closer, sometimes it's going to slow down a bit, so I like to really agitate it. I'm going to set it down for a second. It could take like up to a minute for it to actually get to pH 7, so let's give it a moment. All right, so now we can see the pH has hit 7, so we're now done with the EC and pH probes. So what we're going to do is going to take this solution, we're going to set it off to the side. And then once again, we're just going to rinse out our probes in some water, just like so. And now we can put them back into the manifold. So again, we're just going to slide them right in through the top. Might need to give them a little bit of a wiggle. And then we're going to twist the cap like so, till it's nice and tight. We're going to do the same thing for the pH. Going to twist that top. And now we're done with the EC and pH calibration. All right, so next step is calibrating the ORP probe. So we only need one solution. This is the ORP 225 millivolt solution. So we're going to open it up and fill up one of our little plastic tubes with some solution. I made sure to clean it out thoroughly from our last calibration. So now that we have this, we're going to set it aside for a second. And just like all the other probes, we're going to twist the cap a few turns. Then I'm going to wiggle the probe out. Again, maybe it's a little difficult, but you just got to wiggle and pull at the same time. And there we got that. All right, so what I'm going to do now is go into the menu, go to Sensors, again, go to Calibrate. Now click Calibrate ORP and follow the instructions on the screen. All right, so we're going to rinse the probe in a little bit of water. Then I'm going to dry it off with a cloth. Tap it. This one is sort of delicate, not quite as delicate as the pH, but definitely more delicate than the EC and dissolved oxygen. So what we're going to do now is simply put this probe into the solution, and then we're going to hit next. All right, so now that this is done, we're going to hit the done button, and then we're going to go back to the home screen to confirm our calibration. So after a few seconds, this should read about 220. So if you get anywhere between 220 and 230, that means the calibration was successful and we can complete the ORP calibration process. Okay, so now we're going to take the probe out of the solution once again, and we're going to give it a little bit of a rinse. And now we can put it back into our manifold. So we're going to slide it right in. Give it a little bit of a twisting motion until it gets to the very bottom, and then we're going to twist our cap, make sure we have a nice tight seal, and then we're done with ORP calibration. All right, so the final step for calibration is calibrating the dissolved oxygen probe. Now this one is actually different from all the other probes in that you can't actually pull it out straight up because there is a little membrane at the bottom that flares out a bit. So what we're going to have to do is we're actually going to take this off of the manifold like so. If it's a little tight, that's okay. Just make sure you can unscrew it. Get it unscrewed. And now we see we've got the tip exposed. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to give it a little bit of a wipe down. You don't have to worry too much about this. This is a pretty sturdy probe. So now that this is nice and clean, we're going to head over to the menu and then go back to sensors, click on Calibrate, and then hit Calibrate DO. Now we've already followed the instructions on screen. We've cleaned it in water, we've dried it off, and this one's different. It's a lot easier because you don't even need to put it into a solution. So we're actually just going to wave it around in the air. So I'm going to click next, and we'll just kind of move it around a little bit. Now the reason that I move it around is because this actually consumes oxygen. So theoretically, if you leave it in the very same spot, oxygen could be taken away from that spot, and then eventually the oxygen levels will go down. It's very little, so nothing to worry about, but just moving it around is going to ensure you get the most accurate reading. All right, so now it shows that the DO probe has been calibrated, and we're going to go back to the calibration menu. So we're going to click Done, and we're going to click on the home screen. So now that we're done calibrating the dissolved oxygen probe, we want to confirm our calibration. Now the calibration of the dissolved oxygen, or the value of the dissolved oxygen, is going to depend a lot on the temperature. So what we want to actually do is get rid of this temperature so that we can normalize the readings and confirm that we are getting an accurate result. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to go into the menu. I'm going to go to Sensors, click on Display Readings, and then I'm going to get rid of the temperature. Now when we go back to the home screen, we're going to want our dissolved oxygen levels to be somewhere between 8 and 8.4, and that's going to be normal oxygen levels in the atmosphere. So we see right here we're at about 8.3, so that means our calibration was good and we're done with the dissolved oxygen calibration. So now I'm going to take this probe and put it back into the manifold, like so. Make sure it's got a nice tight seal. And then finally we have to make sure we put our temperature back. So I'm going to go back into the menu, click on Sensors, do Display Readings, and turn back on the temperature. And we are done with our calibration of the dissolved oxygen, and now all the sensors are calibrated. Now that we've got all our sensors back in, we're ready to start using our system. So I'm going to now open up these ball valves, and we're going to plug back in our circulation pump, and we're ready to go.